Hey, welcome back to the Horsepower Monster. You know, over the years, we've done several build videos with Keith Newcomer and his Jeep engines with Newcomer Racing, and you've always eaten them up. So when Keith called and said he had a new R&D motor, turbocharged, intercooled, that he was going to put on the dyno to do a little testing, we said, heck yeah, we're in. So this is not a full, complete build video. We're just kind of tagging along to the dyno to see how much power he can make. And if something blows up, hey, all the better for us, right? If you will, please pardon this interruption, but I needed to jump in real quick. I'm editing the video now, and when I introduced this video, before we actually got started on the dyno, I had no clue how crazy this was going to get, but things got out of hand real fast. This turned out to be one of the most fun, one of the most insane dyno sessions I've ever been a part of. And I should have expected that when I'm ever doing something with Keith Newcomer. But we blew stuff up. We hit insane power levels, and I'm pretty sure, no joking, we made history. So hang in there. Believe me, it's going to be worth it. Keith, I obviously have more important things to do when you were putting this together and missing assembly. Tell me about what we've got going on here that we've got put on the dyno.
This is actually a motor that I've had for a few years now for myself. I've got a Turbo XJ with a 4-liter, and I can't seem to kill it. And I can't quite make myself put this in it yet because everything behind it won't hold up to it. So one thing after another, I finally said I'm just going to put it together and we're going to try some stuff. So the short block I have, went ahead and put it together. The head is kind of a little R&D project. We've done a few of these lately and I want to see how it's going to run. So we decided to put everything together. Some of the old parts we had from a turbo project we did probably 10 years ago. Pulled them out of the closet and here we go. We're going to try it and see what it makes.
What are you running for compression? Is this a naturally aspirated motor that we're putting a turbo on, or is this a turbo motor that we're going to start out naturally aspirated?
So this was a turbo motor that we put a smaller combustion chamber on. So now it's a high compression turbo motor basically. And I've heard a bunch of slack about that for years. Oh, you can run more compression and it'll run so much better. Because we normally run lower compression for pump gas stuff. I mean, like my motor, it's an iron-headed one and it runs on 93 on like 18 pounds. So this one is 11.8 to 1. And we're going to throw the boost to it and just see what it'll take.
Well, talk to me about, you've got several things here that's just basically your dyno set up to make it easier to dyno, right? You got your snow performance, water meth injection, everything's kind of in place around the motor. Is that just to make it easier to fit up on the dyno?
Yes, yeah. We ran this years ago, and it basically just made a bracket off of it just to hold everything. And then one thing led to another. Now it's pretty much self-contained. You put power and ground to this thing, it's going to run. And if you want to come over here and look, we had a boost gauge laying around. We had our wideband. This is a snow performance kit. We plan on using, but we're going to see what it'll make without this first. And then full MSD ignition, MSD boost retard, and here's the dial, 0 to 3 degrees based on how much you want to, dial it back. And then this controls the boost manually. It's real simple. And then the fuel system, we've got your input and return, and then it's got a boost reference. I stuck a gauge on here so we can monitor it. When it hits boost, it ought to go up 1 for 1 for boost. It's pretty much all self-contained.
And since I didn't shoot the build, let me take a second to tell you what we're working with. This is a stock Jeep straight 6 block. And it's actually an NVH block, so it's one of the newer ones. It's been outfitted with an aftermarket crank. It's cast, but it's also fully counterweighted. And attached to it are a set of scat connecting rods and custom JE forged pistons. Total displacement is 4.6 liters. So really nothing out of the ordinary so far. What's interesting to note is Keith may have gone with an aftermarket rotating assembly, but the main caps, the main girdle, and the main bolts are all totally stock. It's all the same stuff that came from the block from the factory. This may end up being a weak point, But we'll just have to wait and see if it pukes its guts out into the stock oil pan. The cylinder head is a fairly trick piece. It's Edelbrock's aluminum cylinder head that Keith has done some pretty serious port work on and added larger valves. Feeding the air and fuel will be a Holley 650 CFM double pumper carb bolted to an old Clifford cast intake manifold. Now, it is stock style, but supposed to be just a tick better than stock. Keith has also done some port work to it as well. Now, here's an interesting thing to note. Whenever we've been on the dyno with Keith, we've always been a little nervous using that stock Jeep flywheel. Aftermarket performance options for the straight six are pretty limited. So Keith actually machined up his own heavyweight flywheel, which should be much less likely to explode under the abuse of the chassis dyno. Keith mentioned earlier that this is a relatively high compression engine even before we add boost. An engine dyno is tougher on an engine when it comes to inducing detonation than normal road driving because it mechanically holds the RPMs down while the engine is held at full throttle. So, to make sure we don't rattle the pistons, we're going to be burning Sunoco's race-bred Max NOS 116 octane fuel. If you're a drag racer, you're probably already well aware of this stuff because it's formulated to resist detonation even under extreme pressure and temperature in the combustion chamber. And if you haven't heard of Max NOS, believe me, it's really good stuff. Now, the whole point of this trip to the dyno is to see just how much power we can squeeze out of this bad boy with the help of a turbo. But before you can know how much a turbo makes, it helps to know how much the engine is worth without it. So, as soon as the engine was bolted up on the dyno, Keith and Devin Rowell started ripping off the 72mm precision turbo and all the necessary plumbing. So, all that's left is to warm everything up, run a break-in cycle, go through a quick last check to make sure everything is still at 12 thousandths of an inch for the intakes and the exhaust. And after the break-in, we'll be ready to get down to business. These rocker arms are a whole lot sexier than the stock steel stamped rockers. Newcomer Racing actually has full roller rockers made to their specs in different ratios, which are much better at handling high RPMs and big valve spring pressures without flexing like the stock rockers are prone to do.
Yeah, so this is our rockers. This is a 1.7 rocker. They're a pretty light version. And the cam, I'm trying to remember which one it is. It's a 236 on a 113. And it should work pretty good for this. We can twist it about 6,500.
So these are Newcomer Racing rockers.
Yes. Yeah, we have them in fixed and adjustables, 1.6 and 1.7. And these are adjustable 1.7s. They're a lot stronger. You can up your spring pressure and they'll take it. You know, stamped steel rocker, you'll end up burning the ball out, or a fulcrum. These, they won't happen. These are all scalloped out, lightened. They work really well for high RPM stuff.
So that's all the prep work. Let's do what we came here for and start making pulls. By the way, for this session, we're using the dyno cell at Tony's Competition Engines. Tony Corrente specializes in big power for stock car and modified oval track race cars. And that's him at the dyno controls. peaks of 375.5 foot-pounds of torque at 4,600 RPM and 394.1 horsepower at 6,100. Not too bad, considering the stock Jeep maxed out at around 200 horsepower over the years. But even with more than 11-to-1 compression, this engine isn't exactly tuned for naturally aspirated performance. For one, it has what's basically a blow-through carburetor with a few modifications to work naturally aspirated. Plus, the exhaust header with its 1 7/8" tubing is custom built for its turbo application and isn't the best for a naturally aspirated setup. Keith says this engine combo with the correct carburetor and exhaust peaked at 417 horsepower, which is right at 23 better. Next up, Keith and Devin wanted to test an idea that was just too cool to pass up. Compared to superchargers, turbos are often spoken of as free power since they're spun up off the exhaust pressure and not by the crankshaft. So we thought we'd see. All we really did was hook up the turbo to the exhaust header and left the intake plumbing off. Simple, right? Let's see what it does. By the way, that smoke is from a combination of paint burning off the freshly rebuilt turbo and an oil feed line that turned out not to be completely tight. And the result. Maybe it's what you expect. I thought the turbo blocking the exhaust pulses would hurt power production somewhere in the upper RPM range, but I didn't expect it to hurt as much as it did all the way through the pull. The peak power numbers dropped 36.2 foot-pounds of torque to 339.3 and 37.5 horsepower to 356.6. And the averages across the pull dropped by 28.1 foot-pounds of torque and 25.9 horsepower. So what does that mean for us? Not too much really, because nobody ever hooks up a turbo and just forgets to install the compressor side. But it is interesting. Next up, we're finally bolting up the turbo for real. But first, Devin and Keith changed over the carb to a blow-through setup.
What are we doing to the carb to get it ready for turbo, Devin?
We're going to block off the power valves and change the jets and the needle and seats on.
The needle and seat assembly had 120 thousandths hole. For a blow-through tune, Newcomer is switching to a larger 140 thousandths needle and seat assembly. And of course, the needle and seat also controls the float setting in the bowl. So every time you change the needle and seat, you'll need to reset the float level height. Fortunately, Keith has a quick and dirty trick to at least get you close.
If you're trying to put a needle in a seat in a Holly, and you just stick it in there and you're wondering, you're trying to set it by the height, there's not always a sight glass. The best way to set it is with a set of calipers. And we're just going to kind of screw this one in here. If you turn it upside down, you'll see the float the way it hangs. But if you tighten this up, the float will go up eventually. You see it going up and down. So you measure from the bottom here to that parting line, and 850 is a really, really good starting point. 800, 850, 800 to 900 is a good range, but if you set that to like 850, that's all you gotta do. So then you don't have to guess where your float height's gonna be, and it's not gonna shoot out of vent tubes. Just a quick way to make it work well.
And with the carburetor changed over, we were ready to fully assemble the rest of the tubing from the compressor side of the turbo. By the way, this is a relatively small 72mm turbo from Precision Turbo, and the routing for the intercooler is just for ease of use on the dyno. It isn't designed to fit inside of any specific vehicle. As I mentioned earlier, Tony's Competition Engines specializes in circle track racing engines where boost is obviously verboten. So He currently doesn't even have sensors on his dyno to read more than 10 pounds of positive boost pressure. And to keep things simple, Keith just mounted a boost level gauge on the bracket above the intercooler. And that's a digital air fuel meter just to the left of it. Time for our first turbo pull. Now, this looks like a turbo run. The lower line is the initial naturally aspirated pull for comparison. But with 27 pounds of boost, we predictably saw big gains all the way through the pull. As you can see, we started the pull 500 RPM later at 3,500 RPM because we didn't want the turbo pushing in too much boost while the dyno was holding the piston speed low in the RPM range. But then we also pulled out 200 RPM earlier than before because the engine was seeing 27 pounds of boost and we didn't want to push it any harder than that. But still, man, 715.9 foot-pounds of torque at 5,800 RPM and 813.4 horsepower at 6,200. The results are way better than we had even hoped. That's more than double the horsepower. It also touched off a spark. A few years ago, we made a video with Newcomer Racing when they built an engine to break the unofficial world record for a Jeep Straight 6. Keith and his crew did that with a turbocharged Straight 6, making a peak of 861 horsepower. And if you're interested in that one, I'll put a link to it in the description below. Now that engine was filled with hard block, fuel injected, and had the advantage of water methanol injected to help cool the incoming air fuel charge. It also had a much lower compression ratio at around 8:1. Surprisingly, we were within 50 horsepower of that mark with this engine that still has the stock main bolts and caps and was having to push air through a relatively small 650 CFM carb. Oh, and no hard block either. The efficiency of Keith's combo had improved to the point that we were that close with a relatively pedestrian bottom end. So the question was, could this stock block with totally stock main caps and fasteners, no hard block in the water jackets, and a pretty high compression ratio of 11:1 actually hold up under 27 pounds of boost pressure for some extremely big horsepower numbers? One way to find out. So, of course, we pushed on to see if we could eclipse Keith's previous record of 861.3 horsepower and 881.7 foot-pounds of torque. Additional pulls got us closer, but we still couldn't quite get there. But check out the center header tubes on this pull. One of the inherent weaknesses of the stock style intake manifold is the center runners always manage to run lean in the upper RPM range. Once Keith felt like he had exhausted the tuning capabilities of the current setup, he revealed his secret weapon and pulled out a larger 77mm turbo from Pulsar. It may look quite a bit bigger than the Precision turbo, but the Precision unit simply has a more compact compressor body. By the way, the timing is set at 28 degrees initial with an additional degree of timing advance added with every pound of boost. We did have a few tuning issues that I won't bore you with, but essentially, we struggled with the engine going lean as well as picking up too much boost. To fix the lean issue, Keith and Devin went to 121 jets in the carb on all four corners, and for the boost, we changed out the no-name eBay blow-off valve with a quality tile valve they pulled off another one of their engines. So, fingers crossed we can get further into the pull before having to pull the handle with boost creep. Hey, let's make that pull and let's see. It turns out we just didn't get the new blow-off valve fully seated on the flange when it was installed. So the clamp wasn't able to hang on once the pressure really ramped up and things went kablooey. It didn't hurt anything, but man, a few hearts stopped there for a moment. Once we figured out the problem, it was only a matter of a few moments to make sure the blow-off valve was reinstalled correctly, and we were ready for more pulls.
Okay, we've gone way longer than we meant to. It's getting on to 9 o'clock now. My batteries are almost dead. I'm running out of memory card, but we're making some serious power. So we're gonna keep pushing and see just how far this engine will go.
And along the way, we did break that 861 horsepower mark. It happened so easily, in fact, it was almost anticlimactic. And then somehow the goal morphed from there into breaking the 1,000 horsepower mark.
989 right now. Keith, what's it gonna take to get to 1,000?
Cross your fingers.
989 horsepower. Getting so close. And the engine is nice and healthy and feeling good. We pulled out of that run early because Keith noticed that it was getting a little bit lean. So we're making a jet change. Gonna make a money run, try to get to 1,000. $1,082, 5587 RPM.
We still got 1,000 to go.
Now you were not expecting that when you left the house this morning, right?
Well, hell yeah, I was.
1,017.7 foot-pounds of torque and 1,082.6 horsepower. New world record. And as you can see, the numbers were headed to the moon when Keith pulled back on the needle at 5,600 RPM, simply because the old Jeep motor was already bumping up against 27 pounds of boost. It was, to say, a huge win.
Man, Keith, this was an unqualified success. Did you expect these kind of numbers when you got here?
No. Like, we hoped for it, but I figured this choke point would be the demise. And I guess if you push hard enough, it'll make it.
The difference was the turbo?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We went from the Precision, and I'm not knocking Precision or anybody else, but the 72mm setup, it was a smaller frame turbo. And I know it's got its limitations, and we kind of fought with it and thought, well, let's just put the big frame on and see what happens. And man, does it respond. It's kind of crazy. And we only revved to 5,500 because we just literally ran out of fuel. That's all the fuel we can pump through this. It's just a fine line of getting at the spool, but then having the fuel up top, and this isn't ideal for that, but it made it.
What happens to this motor now?
Actually, this motor was my second motor for the Rambler. And the videos that we're doing, this is the boosted motor that when we do like drag and drives, this is what we were wanting. Well, it works. We're going to be fuel injected next time though, so I guarantee you it will make more than this fuel injected and be a lot better controlled.
Watch out, world. Here comes one ridiculous Rambler. Thanks for watching.
One quick note before we finish. And first of all, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. Please leave a like and maybe a comment. I had a blast on the dyno this time. Let us know the best time you've ever had working with friends on a car or an engine in the dyno or something like that. I'd really love to hear it. But second, I pretty aggressively stated that I believe this is a world record horsepower number for a Jeep straight six engine. And I believe that. But if I've missed something in my research, if somebody actually has done better than 1,082 horsepower, I'd love to hear about it. Send me a note to jeff@horsepowermonster.com. And don't just tell me, oh, I got a buddy who overheard somebody in a bar talking about his 3,000 horsepower Jeep. That's not what I'm talking about. If you've got video proof, if you've got a magazine article, if you've got evidence of somebody busting 1,000 horsepower with the Jeep 4 liter, let me know. I'd love to hear it. Hey, and thanks for watching.